took the job because it sounded like a breeze. Watch over a forest retreat during the off-season, keep the vandals and curious teens at bay, and enjoy the solitude. Simple, right? Honestly, it was the paycheck that got me. It was way too generous for what was described as essentially babysitting a bunch of empty cabins. The place was called Hushwood Retreat, nestled somewhere between the dust of forgotten rural roads and the whispers of an evergreen empire. My briefing with the owner, Mr. Donnelly, should have been my first clue that this job was off. Nothing major, just off. Donnelly was a sharply dressed, 60-something with a handshake that felt like snapping twigs. Our meeting happened at a roadside diner that smelled like grease and stale coffee, clouds from the nearby lake casting gray shadows through the windows. "You'll find the job straightforward," he reassured me, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table. "Just a few rules to follow." I unfolded the paper, half expecting something normal, like lock the gates or don't feed the animals. Instead, the rules read like a prank. 1. Always keep the lantern near the east entrance lit between sunset and sunrise. 2. Never let the fire in the hearth cabin go out. The firewood outside the back should suffice. 3. Do not, under any circumstance, follow the sounds coming from the North Grove after dark. 4. The statues around the retreat are historic. Report immediately if any of them appear to move or change in appearance. 5. Ignore any voices calling from the lake at night. 6. If you notice your shadow behaving oddly, stand in direct sunlight until it returns to normal. 7. Never answer the door at the main office after midnight. 8. Spend at least 1 hour a day inside the library. It keeps the place feeling lived in. I tried to mask my bewilderment as I looked up from the list. Is this a joke? Donnelly didn't even smile. "You'll find Hushwood is a unique place. These rules are meant to make your stay safe and unproblematic." "Right," I chuckled, folding the paper and stuffing it in my jacket. Rule 6, about the shadows, almost had me burst out laughing, but the seriousness looming in Donnelly's eyes clamped down on my amusement. I arrived at the retreat a couple of days later, the sun setting behind me, painting the sky in strokes of blood and orange. The place was beautiful, eerie in a scenic way. The cabins peeked out between towering pines and moss-covered statues that made you look twice, not because they might move, but because they seemed too lifelike, trapped in their stone form. The first night was quiet. I kept busy moving into the main office, a cozy enough building with windows overlooking the forest. Remembering Rule 7, I laughed to myself as I double-checked the locks past midnight. It was around the second or third day when the weirdness cranked up a notch. I was refilling the lantern near the east entrance when I noticed the smell, wet dirt, but underneath, something sour, like spoiled meat. I chalked it up to some animal's unlucky end and continued my rounds. That same evening, I decided to get a head start on Rule 8 and visit the library. The air inside felt dense, almost watchful. The books were an odd mix, plenty of local histories and some bizarre titles about symbolic rituals and pre-colonial folklore. I picked one up, flipping through pages as the room grew colder, the kind of cold that made your skin prickle. And then it happened. A soft thump from the far end of the library. I froze, listening, hoping for a reasonable explanation. Another thump, this time followed by a dragging sound, like a bag of flour slowly being pulled across the floor. My mind raced, animals maybe, but indoors and in the library. The dragging stopped, replaced by a low, mournful creak that seemed to resonate with the very walls of the retreat. I stood up, the book slipping from my fingers. My heart pounded like an execution drum as I moved towards the sound, each step reluctant. I reached the last row, turning the corner, and there, moving along the shadows, was my own stretched, distorted silhouette, except it wasn't mimicking me. As I stood still, it continued to stretch, reaching out toward the dim light, before snapping back into shape. It was exactly then that I remembered Rule 6. Not a great time to notice your shadow wasn't obeying the rules. As the stubby fingers of sunlight dwindled to mere slivers against the crumbling wallpaper of the hallway, my shadow, or what was supposed to be my shadow, loomed over them, grotesquely distended and dark against the fading light. It didn't flicker or warp as a normal shadow should under the mutable candlelight. Instead, it maintained a dreadfully steady shape. A cold prickle ran down my spine as I realized I could no longer pretend it was merely a trick of the light. It was almost as if it were waiting, expectantly, for something dire to unfold. I took a step forward, and it didn't mimic me. It stayed resolutely still, meeting my movements with a terrifying nonchalance. My breath hitched. Rule 6 on the crumpled sheet I had found when I first entered the house. Your shadow is your own. If it stops acting as such, do not turn your back on it. I scoffed at it then, a curious inclusion among a list of what seemed ordinary safety measures. No open flames near curtains, no venturing into the attic. But now, that mockery was lodged in my throat like a barbed wire. Did the previous occupant of this forsaken place experience this too? Was that why the room was abandoned? A half-filled cup of coffee still on the table. A dusty layer over everything, as if time itself decided to lightly skip this space henceforth. Every instinct was screaming to sprint back to the flickering safety of the living room. But my feet betrayed me, rooting to the moldy carpet as if they too were afraid of what my aberrant shadow might do should I turn my back. I watched it, and it watched nowhere, perfectly opaque and perfectly still. Trying to control my trembling hands, I reached slowly into my pocket for my phone. The light flickered as I thumbed it on, casting real shadows that danced nervously around the room, but did nothing to disturb the one that was mine but not mine. I tried directing the phone's flashlight at it, a silly, desperate attempt to force it back into normalcy. No use. It remained distinctly apart from the laws of physics, like a blot of ink on reality. The house groaned, a subtle shift of old wood and a whispered hiss of history that seemed louder in the encroaching silence of night. Was that movement upstairs? No, focus on the immediate threat, I scolded myself. You have one rule breaking already, don't add imagination to the mix. Then a low, murmuring sound started to build, so faint I thought I might be imagining it. A soft, raspy voice, as if a conversation was being held through old, woven tapestries. I strained my ears, and the realization that the noise stemmed from my own shadow sent icy chills through every vein. It was speaking chanting something unintelligible. I couldn't make out words, let alone meaning, but the tone, the cadence was pleading, almost prayerful. My heart pounded, each beat a loud drum against the eerie recital. That's when another rule surged forth in my memory, merciless and clear. If the shadows speak, do not listen. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound seemed to bypass flesh and bone and burrow directly into my brain. My own shadow appeared to swell, surge forward, then sharply retreat back to its previous mocking outline on the cracked wall. What did it want? Why was it not just following me, but now engaging with an unheard world beyond my comprehension? I risked a glance at the window, contemplating a reckless leap, but the night outside looked even more sinister than the tangle I was in. Then my eyes caught something, a reflection. Not in the glass, but in the mirror hung askew on the hallway wall, a smeared, shadowy handprint on the surface, much too large and distorted to be human. That chilled me more than my vocal shadow. I hadn't touched that mirror. I hadn't even come close. Yet something had left a mark, a warning, or perhaps a claim. The chanting grew louder, more insistent. I backed away slowly, moving inch by painful inch towards the living room. My every step was matched by my shadow, glued now to my form but not mirroring, menacing. As I reached the threshold I dared not cross, The entire house seemed to pulse with a stolen heartbeat. A terror specific and profound gripped me. What happens if I cross? What awaits in the dark? I couldn't move further. Not yet. Not until understanding how deep into nightmare I had wandered, and if there was any wandering back out. The hallway seemed to stretch before me, its end lost in darkness, its walls pressing in like the ribs of some colossal beast. There, right at the edge of my vision, the wallpaper, flecked with mold and sagging like skin from bone, appeared to pulse. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a lie whispered by my dwindling rationality. I could feel the dampness seeping through the soles of my shoes, cold and ancient. Step after hesitant step, I pressed forward. Each creak of the decaying wood beneath me was a sinister greeting, a mocking welcome deeper into the home's rotting heart. The stale air thickened as I ventured onward, carrying a faint, sweet stench of decay that seemed to cling to the back of my throat. I should have run. I should have turned and fled back through the open door, back into the night where the only horrors were shadows and the occasional rustle of tree branches. But something whispered deeper into the shadow, an inexplicable tug at my core that felt all too much like fate, or perhaps doom. Arriving at a doorway, I hesitated. My hand hovered above the tarnished brass doorknob, my heart pounding in thick, heavy beats as though warning me, urging me to reconsider. At that moment, something scratched from the other side, a low, deliberate scrape. Fear clenched my stomach, but curiosity turned the knob beneath my trembling fingers. The door swung open with an agonized groan, revealing a small room cloaked in shadows. The only light was from my own shaking flashlight, which painted the walls in anemic yellow swaths. Then, the light beam settled on something in the corner. It was a painting, an oil canvas smudged with dark hues and unsettling strokes. I couldn't tell what it depicted. The forms were twisted, morphing under my gaze, figures forever caught between becoming something or unraveling into nothing. As I stared, I was certain it pulsed, its edges bleeding color into the air like smoke. I blinked, just my imagination, surely. Yet, as I drew closer, a chill settled in my bones, unlike anything the cold air could craft. The depicted figures seemed to watch me, their painted eyes following with an intensity that clawed at my sanity. Whispers, or what my mind registered as whispers, filled the room, voices too soft to distinguish words, but filled with an urgent malice. I stumbled back, bumping into the wall behind me. My breath fogged in the air, a visible testament to the drop in temperature, or perhaps to my escalating fear. I should leave, I told myself. But even as the thought formed, my gaze returned to the painting, drawn by a morbid fascination I couldn't shake. The floorboards moaned behind me, a sound that thrust me out of my trance. I whirled around, flashlight casting wild arcs of light. Nothing. The empty room lay behind me, untouched yet unmistakably colder. My heart skittered. Was the house alive? It felt foolish, yet the thought took root. Each groan of settling wood or whine of the wind no longer seemed natural but sinister, as though the house resented my intrusion. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony now that they had my full attention. I clamped my hands over my ears, desperate to block them out, but they burrowed deeper into my mind, under my skin. They spoke of things best left unsaid, truths about what lurked in the decaying walls, forgotten tragedies steeped in the dark. I rushed from the room, the door slamming shut with a violence that cut through the murmurs. The quiet that followed was suffocating, absolute, and heavy. My flashlight flickered, breaths of darkness swallowing me before reluctant light returned. The silence was abruptly broken, a cry thin and sharp, a child's wail echoing down the corridor. I froze, every nerve ending alight with dread. Was it real, or just another layer of this nightmare? The darkness seemed thicker as I ventured toward the sound, each step an act of will. Just outside the room, the cry was louder, more desperate. I reached for the door, skin prickling with the certainty of what I would find, yet compelled by a need to know, to face whatever horror lay ahead. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open slowly. The hinges groaning like the mournful cry of an old tree bending against a stormy wind. The autumn night air slipped through the widening gap, disgorging the sickly sweet scent of decaying foliage mixed with something else, something metallic that tingled at the back of my throat. Inside, the room awaited in gloom, light from the hall casting long, distorted shadows across the floor, as if the darkness itself was stretching towards me. I flicked the light switch by habit, but only a faint flicker responded before leaving me once again in near darkness. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, each beat echoing unnervingly loud in the silent house. Stepping inside, the floorboards creaked under my weight, loud enough that I hesitated, frozen, half expecting something, or someone, to answer back. Nothing. Just the wind's whispers creeping through unseen gaps in the window frames, sounding almost like hushed voices plotting in secrecy. I moved further in, my fingers brushed against the cold wall to guide me. They slipped over something wet, sticky. I jerked back, wiping my hand on my jeans instinctively. The substance was too thick for water, its coppery scent confirming it was blood. My stomach churned violently at the realization. Ahead, the vague outlines of furniture loomed. The living room was a collection of silhouettes, each piece distorted and unfamiliar in the dark, turning the once cozy space into a gallery of grotesques. My mind raced, every explanation more horrifying than the last, but paralysis clung to me like a second skin, heavy and suffocating. A sudden crash from the kitchen hammered through the air, breaking my trance. My head snapped towards the sound, eyes wide, straining in the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I listened, heart pounding so violently I feared it might burst. Minutes, or was it seconds, passed in agonizing silence. Then, a soft, dragging sound began, as if something heavy were being pulled across the tile floor of the kitchen. Each scrape against the floor was a hot needle in my already frayed nerves. I should have run. I should have left the house and never looked back, but my feet betrayed me, moving almost mechanically toward the sound. As I approached the kitchen doorway, a vile smell assaulted me. It was putrid, like rotting meat left out too long in the heat, and it mixed with the blood to form a noxious perfume that filled the air, dense and oppressive. Peering around the corner, my eyes struggled to adjust to the deeper darkness of the kitchen. The moon, hanging low in a cloudless sky, threw a miserly beam through the window, casting an eerie glow on the scene before me. There in the scant light, the floor was slick with red, leading to the table where something was sprawled across it. No, not something, someone. A leg dangled limply off the side, swaying slightly as if in a soft breeze. My mind refused to acknowledge what my eyes saw, clinging to the last shreds of denial. My gaze moved, unbidden, toward the kitchen counter, where a cluster of dark, misshapen forms lay haphazard. Sharp, angular knives. They seemed to glint mockingly, bathed in moonlight, whispering promises of violence. Fear tethered me to the spot, but a deeper compulsion, a horrific need to understand, propelled me forward. I edged closer, the smell growing stronger, mixing now with the iron tang of blood that seemed to permeate every breath. As I reached the table, I saw her face. It was Mrs. Patterson, her eyes wide open, staring into nothingness, lips parted in a silent scream. Terror, I realized, can kill before death ever touches the body. My mind reeled, unable to process how the gentle old lady who fed stray cats and waved from her garden could end in such horror. Behind me, a floorboard creaked ominously, snapping the delicate thread of my courage, and I whirled around. There, in the threshold, stood a shadow, a darker patch within the dark, a form both vague and terrifyingly present. Its breath was a rattling whisper in the still air, a sound of wet leaves and soil. A cold dread more profound than the autumn night's chill enveloped me, rooting me to the spot, and as it stepped forward, the last remnants of doubt evaporated. I wished I had trusted the unease that had tugged at me since arriving. Now, the reality I had been too frightened to confront was horrifyingly clear, and it was coming closer.